Post on me. My apologies for that. Actually, I think I can. Anyway, I'm going to repeat what I was saying before I was cut off by the splitting of the video, but also there was a phone call I had to attend to. Dostoevsky, in Notes from Underground, he addresses this notion of he's trying to emphasize that in his generation there was this optimism of kind of modernity that if we can just understand how the human being how almost like to the directly to the degree of taking away their free will, of saying, well, you feel like you have free will, but once we understand how you work, then we can arrange society in such a way that you will be most happy. And then everything will work out perfectly. And Dostoevsky, at least his character, rebels against this because he's like, you don't understand human beings at all. There's a real indignity that I think is at the core of STPs and NFJs, especially STPs, and I know very much in me this idea of you do not understand. Human beings, how do I explain this? There is a strong reaction against the idea that, firstly, against any kind of denial of free will or free agency, because that amounts to a denial of identity. But it's this idea of you are not able to predict what I'm going to do. I refuse to allow you what, in my mind, is kind of this. I'm associating it with TE because it's this. It's these external laws, and it's like I have my own internal laws, and those are the ones that I follow, and you cannot predict what I'm going to do. I retain that right, I think is the best way I can explain it. And I feel like I see this in the ESTP, and I think it shows up in other types too. But this very strong reaction against the idea that anybody that it's this celebration or this assertion of lost my train of thought. This internal assertion of their almost pure choosing ability, and even in its irrationality. And it kind of amounts to this ability to, in every individual case, you cannot reduce every individual case to some, pure SI form or something. I am able to choose in every case. And you cannot, I refuse to allow you to have the ability to predict what I'm going to do. I refuse to allow you to reduce me to a machine or to a child or to something that you can control. There's kind of a weird power fantasy that I find will sometimes come out when I'm playing D&D, when I feel that another character is acting as though they're so much smarter than my character and that they know everything. And part of this is because the DM does know everything, and sometimes that shines through. And it really annoys me through my character. I'm not going to say it annoys me because it's just a weird relationship between me and the character I'm playing. But it definitely annoys the character because they're like, no, you seem to think you know everything. And I instantly feel the need to try to prove you wrong. As I'm saying this, I'm kind of wondering, I think there's almost certainly similarities here with other types, probably NTJs, because I know some, but I think there's certain differences in the exact structure of what's going on here, at least with me, because for me, it's definitely this idea of I get to have my own principles. Thank you very much. And I just don't like the idea. And like in the case with the whatever the case was before, with the one guy who had read my mind and was like, oh, I'm going to continue being nice and everything. It's like there's this strong urge to basically, I will now do everything in my power to break you. Like in the sense of you are too schmarmy, you're too confident in regards to me, and so you seem to think you know everything that's going to happen. And my first instinct is I am going to destroy that presumption of yours by doing something completely random or something like that. So that is a nice segue into the other point about the ESTP. It takes me forever to get to these points because I have to like follow it along all of this long ways. But the idea of randomness that I think is very important for the ESTP. I shouldn't even. So here's another interesting story that will help to demonstrate this. I want to make sure it's focused on me. Cool, it is. So my father on INTP, it's very interesting when we play chess, which doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. But especially we played chess even when I was a kid. And the most recent time we played just a straight game of chess, he ended up winning, as he usually does. And I found that one of the main problems I have when playing chess is he gets an actual enjoyment out of the idea of knowing and being able to employ certain sets of moves and like knowing that if they open this way, well, these are the best usual ways of being able to reply to that and kind of having this interesting playing out of all of these different sort of move sets. And it's much more, what's the right term? It's much more conceptual. It's much more like he's hovering above the board outside of space and time and looking in on what's happening and sort of seeing various possibilities and trying to see, okay, how can we make this game sort of, but it's that being outside of space and time kind of thing going on that I don't relate to. So the idea that, because you see what's happening here is ultimately, in my mind, it's like, okay, well, in that case, you basically play like a computer where all you're doing is computing all these different possibilities or you're just following almost like a programming. And in my mind, it's like there's no you there playing against me. It's like I might as well just play against a rule book or something, if that makes sense. Because in some sense, in that case, I could figure out what you're going to do because you're going to follow these rules, like in terms of what moves you're going to make, and you're going to move them in these. I'm not explaining it quite very well, but and he wins, by the way, because the problem is for me, I'll often have a difficult time holding like 10 different possibilities, holding too many possibilities in my head because I look at the board and all I see is for each individual, I see potentially every move that could be made, like whether it's any good or not. It's like I see the piece, pawns can move this, can move this far, Ultimately, it's like I can see, not literally see, but I sense the infinite number of particular games that could be played out of like every kind. And it's like my brain is not able to cut any of those out. It has a hard time cutting them out because it's like, well, what if this is a particular game? It doesn't matter what the sort of it's like, yeah, you can average out what on average happens in games, right? And like what the general best strategy is. But it's only an average. And I'm thinking in terms of the particular game right now. And I'm like, I don't care about your averages because this could be the game where your average doesn't play out. That's my relationship to probability. I get frustrated often. That's why I'll get frustrated often with the way certain people who I believe are usually NESI types. I think that's sort of some of the difference going on. When they talk about statistics and it's like, it just does not do anything for me because my first thought is, okay, but what about all of the cases when that's not the case? Like, it's like you seem to be conflating your sort of hypothetical average, you're conflating that with what is actually happening on the ground in the particular instance. And yeah, that's helpful maybe for like your conceptual work. That's not helpful for actually playing a particular game, even though I usually don't win chess, and that's the irony, right? But I found that the way I wanted to play chess, and I was too timid to actually do it this way, but I've done it a little bit with computers, and it's actually sometimes worked, oddly enough, but when playing against a computer, but not all the time. But the idea of like, I see there's infinite possibilities, and so in some sense, it's so much easier to just go on pure gut intuition and just say, the way I formulated it is that the ESTP cannot outthink the INTP. They're not gonna be able to plan out 10 moves ahead and sort of have this almost mental battle with the other person, and you know, they're not able to outcompute the INTP in terms of seeing possibilities. And I think that's partly because the ESTP sees too many possibilities. They see the entire, you know, board, the logical space, as Wittgenstein might say. I'll get to that in a minute. And so what the way the ESTP can compensate for that, though, is they can't outthink the INTP, but they can outshoot them, as it were. So what the ESTP has to do, and what they'll often do, is you do something random, or you do something that is completely outside of the mold, or is completely only suited for this particular game. You basically shoot, you know, you see, okay, you have, it's like shooting through blinds, you know, it's like pulling a Millennium Falcon, because they have these SI traditions that fall like blinds and cover, you know, they cluster around the most concentrated areas, but they don't cover the whole thing. So if you're an ESTP, all you have to do is thread through the needle in between the two big areas, if that image makes sense. So it's like you do something totally random. And there's another aspect to it too, which is that if you can break the rule sets, then you force them to come down onto your level on the particular playing field where they're not able to plan anything out, because the ESTP can't beat you in you know, your timeless space of being able to see all the possibilities, but they can beat you on the ground in real time because they can shoot faster than you. So the typical STP strategy, and I think it's both STPs, but especially ESTPs, the typical strategy is to, I think this is Miyamoto Musashi who put it this way, this idea of you interrupt the other person's rhythm, because you're not going to beat them if you let them have their rhythm. You have to interrupt their rhythm, and then you can impose your own rhythm upon them, which you're much better at, and you do it so fast that they don't have time to react. That's just how I think in terms of strategizing, is this idea of you have to break things, and then you can do whatever you want. You have to break the shell. It's so much harder to have to try to dance with them. It's much easier to just to impose yourself onto the situation. And the best way to impose yourself on the situation is to create chaos and then step in as the leader in this chaos, because you're the one who created it, so you know where to go, if that makes sense. It's this very interesting idea with the STP that is fascinating to me, and constantly would come out in things I would do as a character, where I would just, or as a DM, where I would just do what in the moment seemed to me to be the most sensible thing, or sometimes I'd just be bored, and so I would do something. The Joker from The Dark Knight, by the way, these are all thoughts I've had before making this video. Like, it all just floats around in my head, and I'll be like pacing around talking to myself, and it'll always sound so much better when I'm talking to myself, and I'm like, man, I wish I were recording this. And then I try to record it, and it just doesn't work out. It's weird. But anyway, one of the things I remember, it's like I'm trying to lead you back through my whole thought process to find all of the things I discovered as I was sort of letting these ideas play out. So that's why I make these really long videos. But anyway, the Joker, let me get to the Joker, is fascinating. I think Christopher Nolan is an INTJ, but that's not really important. that's just interesting in that the Joker, I think the Joker is fascinating because the idea of the character in his Dark Knight film is very ESTP, but it's an ESTP. It's like an ESTP power fantasy where all of the crazy random things they do actually work together. Like, I think some people will talk about the Joker and say that, well, he says he doesn't have a plan, but clearly he has a plan because all of this stuff, in an insane, ridiculous, completely implausible way, all of these things coalesce together. All of these random things that he does actually come together so that, oh, he just happened to put a bomb into the stomach of one of his henchmen and just happened to choose the proper time when Batman was gone to then get a phone call and call them and blow the place up. And then somehow he's the only one who's not blown up by this random explosion, etc., etc., etc. And it's like, yes, but this is because he is an archetypal evil ESTP. Evil, obviously. Where in the archetype world, it doesn't have to be plausible. It just has to be kind of what the fantasy is. And the fantasy is that he doesn't have a plan. And all of this stuff, this crazy stuff that he does, as if by the will of the NI God, right? By the will of some unconscious inspiration in the back of their mind that drives them to make such and such a decision in the moment, actually does turn out to have this incredibly complex INTJ-esque plan, that actually moves them forward in all of this. So it's that idea of, that part where he's talking to Harvey Dent and he's like, do I really look like a man with a plan? It's like, in a weird way, I relate so much to that in many situations in like the D&D world, especially, where I'll just get impulsive and I'll just do things, and it will often frustrate while also entertaining all the other players because I'll just be like, I don't have to be respectful to this person. I'm just going to say whatever I want to them. I'm just going to say the truth to them and just, like, I don't care. Like, if you don't like it, then too bad. I am your god now. It's weird how like quickly it can escalate to basically like, no, I'm not even going to be fair about this. I am your master now. And you don't have a prayer against me. It's really interesting. But I'm glad it's only in D&D sometimes. And I usually don't go that far with it, but I'm just trying to explore the instinct itself. So anyway, the idea with the Joker is fascinating because I think that is sort of the ESTP archetype of doing, of the idea of randomness, of breaking up the system, breaking up the plan, because it's so much easier to opt for the ESTP to operate when there is no plan. And because they can just sort of let their NI guide them, kind of like the Force or something, like you shield off your senses, your intellectual capacity to plan things, and you just let your intuition take over. And the thing I should say, of course, is that there are usually mixed results with this. Yeah, I think it generally depends on both the actual competence of the ESTP in question and the suitability of the scenario for them to actually do this. That's, I think, why often a lot of ESTPs, they can make very good war generals, because war has no rules. In the end, it has no rules, and anyone who tells you otherwise is stupid. I'm sorry. There are no rules. The rule is the goal. And the ESTP is like, okay, I'll do this crazy thing. But more than that, there's this sense of, like Alexander the Great is a great example of this. Haha. Ooh, we have an alarm clock and it goes off. There we go. Alexander the Great, like his whole idea was basically, I'm just going to hit you hard and fast. And so you compensate for your ability to not be able to determine what necessarily the best plan is. You compensate for that through pure intensity of your execution of the plan. That's a Patton quote, by the way, where he's like, a good plan executed with vigor now is 10 times, is better than a perfect plan executed is better than a perfect plan executed later, or something like that, where it's like it's better for you to go and do it fast right now because you need to optimize on the moment right now. You can't wait for things to be perfect because the there's the other there's the other wonderful quote by Patton where he's like, people keep telling me I should worry about my flanks, which is in my metaphorical mind, it's like people keep telling me I should have more of an NE, indirect, sort of more encompassing view of things. Like I shouldn't just be looking straight ahead. And I'm like, no, let the other moron, he's using profanity all the time, but he's like, let the other moron worry about his flanks, because by the time he's done figuring out where to put it, how to figure out his flanks, I'll be cutting his throat. Because he's just like, I will just. And now that I'm talking about it, this is actually how I tend to play Magic the Gathering as well. My preferred strategy usually is I like my decks to be simple. I like them to be straightforward, streamlined, and fast. Unfortunately, this usually doesn't work. Usually I tend to do better with green. If you know anything about Magic the Gathering, I tend to do better with green because I just get a lot of big creatures that can crush stuff. And it's simple, and I can just do that. And I just figure out what's the most efficient, effective way and reliable way for me to get out big things quickly, faster than the other guy, because once it's dragged out too long, it's like, this is getting boring. I just want to crush you because that's so much more simple. So yeah, those are a lot of kind of random thoughts about ESTP. I really wish I could organize these better. I always have more confidence in my ability to talk about these things when I'm talking about them without actually recording myself talking about them, because in my brain I can cut out irrelevant things, but none of it's truly irrelevant because it all flows into each other. Anyway, I'll stop complaining about the format of the video. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about. I feel like I haven't fully articulated the ESTP randomness and taking advantage of the moment. It's that idea of, and it'll drive the INTP up the wall, like with chess. I remember thinking to myself, my first instinct in chess is I don't really want to follow like a long strategy list. I want to do something crazy that will throw the other person off. Like that's the thing me and my father talked about, is that he likes chess as more of a strategic endeavor, in the sense of you plan out the sense of moves. And he kind of, I think, has an aesthetic reaction to seeing a beautiful game once it's all over, and like seeing these different functions kind of play themselves out. He doesn't really care about seeing the real-time stuff, but that's where I get the excitement from. I really love the beautiful, juicy moment where the decisive moment in the game. Not the whole game itself. I like the decisive, juicy moments in the game where I manage to do something that tricks the other person, or is, ultimately sets things in motion that I have complete dominance, or something like this, where it's this taking advantage of the moment. Because the idea of the moment of choice is so much more, I wanted to say delicious or enticing, but I wanted to stop using food imagery. But I can't stop. It's what it is. It's delicious. Anyway, it's that idea of I don't know, train of thought left me. But the decisive moments where it's not about planning, it's about being able to make the snap decision. So it's almost like there is no strategy involved. It really is almost like God intervening, and that's what you're looking for, is the moment when like there's this intervention from another realm that I think is very NISE. So yeah, the idea of randomness. Another thing that is important to note um, is the idea. So what, in effect, what the ESTP is often doing is they are changing the rules of the game. Earlier on, when I was talking about my DMing and also my time doing stuff as a player, I didn't elaborate enough on this idea that really does come up of like my with an ESFP, you it's almost like things are more straightforward because everything that they're doing is in reaction to what's happening in the moment. So they're much more hooked into what's happening because it's SE and TE, and those are both hyper super. Those are the empirical functions that are hooked in to present reality and making the most of it and following my heart and my intuition. And it's like they're 100% that idea of they're looking for the beautiful pure moment when their strategizing has paid off and they're like practically a god, and they're like I can do anything, and that's why they're so happy often. The ESTP is more complicated because with them there has to be this compromise between the sort of pure non-empirical rationality of TI and the purely empirical nature of SE. I've already said that, but the point being that this will manifest by them changing rule sets depending on the context. So they will act in a given context according to principles that they will hold to and not budge on, regardless of what the quantities are on the other side, where they will literally not take advantage of certain things just because they've decided, no, I'm not going to do that because that will give you power over me. So they'll be very stubborn, and this will drive certain other types up the wall because they're like, you're being so unreasonable. Like, this is not advantageous to you. And it's like, you don't understand. I don't care about advantage at this point. I care about maintaining my freedom. And so if I have to, this is Dostoevsky's point in Notes from Underground, if I have to destroy myself, if I have to destroy your system, I'll do it because I value my autonomy over having a utopia. And that was sort of Dostoevsky's sort of angry point that I feel very deeply, is this notion of I need my sovereignty more than I need things to make sense. Um, that's not totally true, but I like the sentiment. I'll go with it. It's a nice little maxim I just invented. Um, uh, I could phrase it very wisely by saying, I need the ability to make sense of things more than I need for them to actually make sense. Whew. I kind of like that. Anyway, but it's the idea of, I like the idea of like changing the rule set depending on the context, and it kind of plays into that Wittgensteinian idea of like a logical space. You see it in Spinoza too, I think, where it's like they see, okay, I know what the board is, and then there's all of the possible moves, all particular moves possible that could ever be played out on the board. And that's reality. The world is everything that is the case. Um, and what is the case is whatever particular paths out of all the possible paths have in fact instantiated in sort of SET reality. So, but I went off topic again. The idea of the rules changing depending on the context of the situation. And the person feeling these rules very strongly. I think I talked a little bit about this, but this is another good example of sort of this ESTP side of me where it was in, where was it? It was in humanities class when we were talking about the Iliad and about Achilles. And I am pro Achilles. I really like Achilles. And I love and I actually not literally got into conflict with the professor, but I remember us clearly not agreeing on Achilles because he was emphasizing the idea that Achilles needed to learn that he's human and he needs to submit to the human condition, and that he's being ultimately unreasonable in how much he is resisting Agamemnon's attempts to win his favor back. And how, but eventually he realizes, there's things more important like Patroclus. And I'm very much of the opposite view, where I'm just like, I am 100% on Achilles' side. Um, Agamemnon, betrayed his trust. He basically broke earlier agreements, made it so that now Achilles is no longer certain that Achilles is going to essentially be paid because he took away his trophy. I know we're talking about women, but we're going to ignore that and pretend it's money or something. Well, actually, I could go a lot more into that in a more I think I could offer at least a kind of weak feminist reinterpretation in favor of the Achilles Bricius thing, but we're not going to try to do that right now. It's not important. The point is that Agamemnon is like taking away his payment and is like, I'm not going to submit to you. I will withdraw myself from the situation. And I'm literally going to not join the battle and watch you be destroyed. Like, there's this weird kind of sense of like, I wonder at what point I will join the battle. Well, the answer is not now and possibly not ever. I'm going to, I want to watch you crawl on your hands and knees and then have the terrible satisfaction of telling you, no, I'm still not going to join you because you have broken something that is. It's just really interesting. But the thing is that the reason he's an ESTP is because later he does go back on that. And the thing that makes him go back on that is some bigger context makes him change the rule set he is now doggedly following, where he switches his anger from Agamemnon onto Hector and says, okay, I will accept all of Agamemnon's presence now because now I need to kill Hector. And by the way, the ruthlessness with which he treats Hector's body, I understand that, and you see it coming out as I'm kind of allowing this more some of, I guess Jung might call it, elements of my own shadow kind of come out because I'm trying to understand it better. Is this thing? No, it hasn't changed yet. Where Achilles is like, it doesn't end with the TE reality of him defeating Hector. Because it's TI, it's not connected to reality in the same way. And so he hooks the body up to his chariot and drags it around. And he's like, I don't care. Like, I don't give a flying bleep a bleep. I'm trying not to swear. I'm trying not to care. Or rather, not trying not to care. I don't care